Hi, thank you for ordering your reversible crop top box. This is what you're going to receive inside your box. You're going to get the pattern for what you ordered. This way you can make it again in the future. And you're also going to get all the fabric you need to make your very own crop top. So here there's 2 pieces that will go in length, with a lower side for the lower side of the tank and then a higher side as well. So let's get started. Here you have your piece folded over at the shoulders, the top, and we're going to be working mostly with the lower cut side as our point of reference, and then there's a high cut side. The sides are on an angle just to fit your body shape, but don't worry, I'll show you where you can make it snugger if you'd want to. There's 4 layers here, and we're going to be working with the good sides facing each other for the most of the project. So open up your pieces. We're going to sew the neckline, so we're going to pin it with the low facing side towards us. And just pin along the edges, making sure the right sides of the fabric are together. This is what I'm explaining here, but since this one doesn't have a good or a bad side, just make it sure it's lined up here. Making sure it's lined up all the way around. You're just going to pin however many pins you need and just go around the neckline. So go ahead and sew your piece using whatever stitch you'd like. You can use a straight stitch or a zigzag stitch if you prefer, just to have a little wiggle room. So now we're going to flip it inside out inside the neckline. So you're going to see I'm just pushing all the fabric into the neckline so that we can flip it out and do the armholes. So just take 1 layer and put it into the neckline, and then grab the sides and fold it over into the neckline, and same thing, the top layer, folding it into the neck hole, just flipping it over and grabbing all the sides and then laying it back down flat. Just flattening it here with the right sides out now. Perfect. We're still working with the low neckline towards us, and now we're going to begin working with the sleeves, or the armholes, sorry. So now we're going to work with the armholes. This one gets a little tricky, but just watch carefully, grabbing the top layer, just 1 layer, shimmying it over all the way over to the right side. There you go. And then we're just going to sandwich all the fabric inside the armhole, and then we're going to sew that and then flip it out, inside out. So we're just going to grab the 2 layers there. So any fabric that's inside there, we're not going to sew into the seam line. Otherwise, we won't be able to turn the fabric over. So just make sure that here you don't grab any of that fabric. You just tuck it nicely in there, and then you can put the pins on top and squishing in that extra fabric. It might get a little tight here because the straps are a little bit thinner, but just be sure to tuck everything in so that it doesn't get caught in the seam. Okay, so line everything up and pin it, making sure not to get any of that fabric in there. And what I did here is I actually double pinned it. So I pinned where the edge of the fabric is, and I also pinned a little bit further in to make sure that fabric was not getting caught in there. So you'll see it in a moment. So I'm just making sure, again, just not to get any of that fabric. I'm taking my time here because I have had it happen where I got it stuck and I had to cut it open or seam seam rip it open and start over. So just making sure that that is nice and tucked in. So this is the second pin that I'm putting in just to give a little bit of a buffer to make sure that there is nothing getting caught in the seam. Keep going along the edge and tucking in the fabric as you go and pinning everything up. This is the double pin again, going all the way through, all the way to the end. So now that you have all your pins in, you can go ahead and sew along this seam line here that I'm just showing out. So go ahead and sew, and as you go, just make sure to take your pins out and make sure the left pins that you don't get them caught in the machine. Of course, you don't want to break your machine, but yeah, just making sure that those are on the side. Perfect. Now that you have that seam done, you can take all the pins out and flip the piece over and pull it through the strap. So here it's kind of going to be a little hard to tug through. Sorry, I just flipped screens there, but yeah, pulling through. It is a small sleeve, so just pull it through there and just shimmy it through. And then take all the fabric out of that sleeve and then open it up again, and we're gonna just go back to our reference point, having the low side towards us. Perfect. So we're just making sure that the whole piece is flat now, and you see how you have a left sleeve now. Strap. Perfect. So we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side, just reversed. So as you can see, I have the low neckline at the bottom again, just as a reference point. So we're going to bring the right side over to the left this time, bringing only one layer of fabric over to the left side. So that top layer of fabric, bring it over, as well as the upper side there as well. Shimmy it over. And we're just going to sandwich the fabric into the strap again. So it's just going to be the outside two layers here that you're going to sandwich the sleeve. There you go, and we're just going to pin the outside pieces again, making sure that you don't catch that fabric. It's super important that you don't do this, otherwise you'll have to start over. So just grabbing the outside pieces of fabric and folding it over and pinning this whole side as well. So make sure to just line the pieces up. And here I'm just showing you that this is going to be the inside of the piece. So that's the inside of the neckline, and then this is the inside of the other side of the strap. So as you go along and pin, adding the pins where you need them to secure the fabric down, and also lining up the edges so you can sew nicely along the edge. So putting an extra pin in there to keep the fabric down as you sew, and then lining up the pieces, the ends there, to sew along the edge. And once you have this all ready, you're going to sew along the edge and do the same thing we did the other side. Here you go. Making sure, of course, that you don't catch any fabric. Here we are sewing the other side, taking out the pins and making sure that the left side pins, you don't get caught in the machine either. And so this is the same thing. I actually had it on the other side, but here you go on this side. So that's also, now we're going to take the pins out and reverse it as well. So pull it through. Once you get the strap, it's a little bit easier to just pull through, and then you shake it all out, and we're going to lay it flat. At this point, you can try it on to make sure that the measurements work for you. So just put it over your neck and pin the sides together so that you can see how much room you have on the sides. You don't want to make it too tight, but it is a fitted piece. And mine was a little bit too big, so I'm going to show you how to make the adjustments if it's the same for you. If it works perfect, you can skip to the next step, but I'll show you this part first. So here I'm just lining everything up. I made the measurements when it was on me, so I needed to take off 1/2 inch. So go ahead and measure out your measurements on the piece, going from top to bottom on each side, making sure you cut both the front and the back piece as you go. Also be mindful of the seam allowance. If you don't take that into consideration, it's going to be just a little bit snugger than when you fit it on, when you fit it to yourself, and then it won't fit just right. So make sure that you measure all those measurements and then just cut off what you need to cut off. Of course, not cutting the pin. And doing both sides equally as well. Make sure to follow the line, the angle of the pattern as well, because your waist will be tighter than your bust, just as a natural body line. Of course, you can fit it to yourself however it lands on your body, but that's just the design of the piece. Perfect. So now that we have that, we're going to bring it back open, and now we're going to work with the bottom piece. So now we're going to attach the bottom piece to each other inside out. So it's going to be a similar process to the strap. We're going to take the bottom upper layer and fold it all the way over, and then the 2 layers will sandwich all the other fabric inside, and we're just going to sew the 2 layers of the bottom fabric. And just sew that, making sure that you don't catch any of that other fabric, but it's much easier on this one. Now that you have that, we're going to do the same thing on the other side, but first we have to flip it over. So just pull all the fabric through and lay it down flat like we had it again. So that's the bottom stitch there, and we're working with the low neckline to the right. So now we're going to do the high neckline side, and then we're going to do the sides. So same thing here, grabbing the top layer here on the left side of the screen and pulling it over all the way over just one layer and shimmying it all the way over and squishing those two pieces of fabric. So I just flipped it over to show you that we're just gonna sandwich all that fabric in and then pin that side and sew that side. Only the 2 layers. Don't forget to do your back stitch when you're going along, and also what I'm explaining here is just to stretch your fabric a little bit so that the piece isn't too tight and you don't pop your stitches. This also works just fine if you're doing a zigzag stitch. It'll give you that room anyways. And yes, I'm just using a straight stitch, but I figured out since this video that you can use a straight and zigzag stitch. It does like 3 or 4 straight stitches and then a zigzag stitch. I've started using that one. And now that you have your neckline, your bottom, and your armholes together, we're gonna do the sides now. So with the low side towards you, we're gonna start with the right side of the piece. So this top layer, just move it over, and then you're gonna grab the 2 inner layers here. These 2 inner layers, you're gonna squeeze them together and you're gonna pin them, and pin your pins vertical. Just because of the way the fabric is, you actually are gonna be sewing on the other side, so you don't want it to be hard to take the pins out as you're sewing it. So you're gonna start pinning all along the 2 pieces of fabric there where you see that first needle. So I'm gonna start at the top and I'm gonna line up the seams of the bottom of the armpit, and I'm going to pin those 2 together. Again, making sure that my pin is vertical just for the ease of sewing after. So also aligning the bottom stitches just so that it looks nice and finished on the outside and that it's nice and lined up. So if you just keep pinning along the edge of the fabric, you'll eventually get to a point where you just tuck the fabric in to itself. Yeah. And then you're going to keep pinning along that side. I could have just pushed it in there, but I did again. And just flipping it over. So you see that I still have a hold of those pins, so that's definitely a good indicator that you're doing it right, just to hold that piece there. And you're gonna just keep pinning along this side now. And when you go to sew this, you're not gonna sew it together, like the 2 sides together. You're gonna sew around it. So just pin all the way around. Yeah, so along, not flat together. And I'm showing you here as well. So you can either use your arm, your sewing arm for this, or you can just make sure that it's tucked underneath. It is a pretty big opening, so it wasn't difficult to do this. So just line it up and then just make sure you're sewing those 2 layers and that the bottom layer doesn't get caught in there. And then just check periodically to make sure that it's not through, and then just bring the rest of the fabric over in front so that you can keep sewing. As you can see that I'm doing here. Just take the pins out as you go, making sure that you adjust it to make sure that it's just those 2 layers that you're sewing, and then sew all the way shut on this one. Perfect. Now that you have this whole side stitched together, we're going to flip it inside out and do the other side with 1 small change to the other side. So flip that over until you have it right sides facing out. So you can see you can pull your strap through and just shake it through and then lay it flat. Perfect. So again, we have the lower neckline side towards us. I had a little freak out here because I thought I had it twisted, but I don't. So it's nice and flat now. But yeah, now that it's flat, we have the lower neckline towards us. I'm going to flip it over to have the high neckline towards us because it's going to be the exact same thing as the other side with 1 minor change. And I'm just adjusting it here so it's nice and flat. So on the left side of the lower neckline, I'm just going to flip it over. And we're going to do the same thing as the other side. So again, we're going to open the first layer of that side, take the 2 inner layers, and pin those 2. So that's the 4th layer. So those 2 inner pieces you're going to pin together again. And we're going to use the pin vertically again rather than horizontally against the fabric. So go ahead, you're going to line up the armpit seam as well, again on this side, as well as the bottom seam. So this one I did earlier than the other side, so just flip it inside out and making sure that you still have those 2 inner layers put together. And then everything should line up on the outside there. So go ahead and line the bottom seam up along with the rest of the fabric with your vertical pins. And this is where it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to leave a small opening here so that we can turn the whole piece inside out. Otherwise, we'll just have an inside out piece. But here what I do is I just put a little opening, maybe 2-3 inches, and then we're just going to start and stop sewing around that that little opening. So what I do to remind myself is I just put 2 pins to make sure that I start and stop at the right spots and I don't forget. Otherwise, all you have to do is just seam rip a small opening and flip the piece through that opening. Of course, the smaller the seam or the smaller the opening is, of course, it'll be harder to flip inside out. So you can leave yourself a bigger opening, and then the top stitch will be on the inside of the piece, so you're not going to see it anyways. So here I'm showing you on the sewing machine. Just start after the second 2 set of pins, of course making sure that you don't sew over them, and making sure that you only are sewing the 2 pieces and not the 4 pieces. So going around all the way to the other side. Taking the pins out as you go. going over that seam and then stopping at the 2 needles that you put in there. I could have probably left myself a little more space here, but go back and forth to make sure that it's a nice edge and that it doesn't open up when you're flipping it over. Cut all your thread and then come back to your table. So here you have the piece and the opening here. So you're going to reach through that opening and flip the whole piece through here. So just pull it through and shimmy it through as you go. And then once you get it all the way through, bring everything nice and flat again. That's the opening that you have. This is going to be on the inside of the piece after we do the top stitch. So you're not going to see any of that. The whole piece from the outside is going to be seamless, which is amazing. It's going to look so good. And here we just do a top final stitch just on these 2 pieces of fabric, so make sure you're not grabbing the piece that's inside, and you're just gonna naturally fold the fabric on the inside and then pin that. And then also I just put a vertical pin just where the hole ends, so I don't have to go all the way up the side seam. And then just at the bottom where it ends also. So from there to there, I'm going to be sewing. So this also means that you don't need any particular color of thread. I just used a light color, but I mean, you can match, of course, if you'd like to. But you don't need to. It won't be seen by anybody except you. So once you have that all top stitched, flip it inside out. And now you have your final piece. Yay! So you have a low neck side, a high neck side, and there you go. You're ready to wear it.